Us.
Hey,
Shihan.
hi, Mitch. Another good couple of sessions today. And in the process of it, I had someone get in touch and they said they wanted to do another Q&A. So I think today we'd like to do that. We'd like to open the floor to pretty well everything, including anything from, technical, how to make a fist, all the way through to, we had someone ask question about the role of spirituality.
Like,
in fact, what is that? What does it even mean?
Yeah, where does it apply in martial arts?
Yeah. So anyway, welcome for coming, and we'll move straight into that. So if you've got a question, please put it in the chat. Either of you two guys, the two guests that we have watching, you're more than welcome to join us. But anyway, the question that someone asked was,
firstly, what is spirituality, and then where does it fit in martial arts? Does it fit? Because there's an assumption that it just exists in traditional martial arts, and he's just wondering.
Yeah, well, I mean, for a start, there's a very strong connection between spirituality and religion, because religion addresses the spiritual nature of man. I guess it's a little bit like a matter of identification. You don't have to agree. You could be totally atheist. It doesn't matter, because the funny thing is, if the atheists are right, they've lost nothing. But if they're wrong, they're in big trouble. They're in big trouble when they go. But anyway, look, the point is, man is a soul and has a body. We identify with the body simply because of the nature of the world we live in. And, we feel the pain, the happy, sad, glad, mad, hot, cold, good, bad, all that. And as a result, we can sometimes lose touch with our identity, but when man is deeply, deeply concentrating, he puts aside the physical, and then for a moment he's touching the more spiritual side of things. So the other thing too is that whilst every religion, one says there's only one God, and two, that God is our God, it's kind of ironic, because if there is only one God, it means the God of all the religions is the same God. It's just that, my littlest son calls me daddy, my oldest son calls me dad, my students call me Shihan, other students call me professor, other students call me coach, someone else might call me something else. So every individual has a numerous numbers of titles. So there is a passage in one of the ancient Indian scriptures that says that God is one, though the wise know he has many names. Okay, so if all religions say there's only one God, don't spoil it by then saying, and that what is ours, not yours, because that's nonsensical. There's only one God. It means that the God of all religions is one. It's just that their approach to that is relative to geography, to the time, to the place, and to the general culture that they live in, So what is spirituality? Basically, if we are a soul and have a body, if you identify with the soul, you think about the difference between a man and an animal. Man eats, animals eat. Gourmets tend to eat a more sophisticated food, but at the end of the day, it's all about the nutrition. Animals sleep, man sleeps. It's just that animals sleep in a nest or on a bed of grass, whilst man sleeps in luxurious 5-star hotels. It's just different in degree. It's not different in kind. Man procreates, animals procreate. That instinct to procreate the species is the second strongest instinct in man and animal. And we fight, we defend our territory. Animals will fight. If you doubt that, walk into the wrong territory. And man fights too. We just do it through highly paid lawyers in a courthouse. But at the end of the day, it's all about protecting our turf. The only thing that a human can do that an animal can't do is meditate, is by meditating, change the trajectory of their natural spiritual evolution. people can argue that, well, we have tools. Animals have shown to have tools. Animals communicate sometimes in a more sophisticated way than we do. So our ability to speak and communicate and make tools and everything is just, again, just different in degrees. We just do it with a much finer detail than animals. But the one thing that we can do that animals can't, because they're instinct bound, is actually make a conscious effort to change the trajectory of our spiritual evolution. And that's why some argue that if you're a man, if you're a human being, the one thing that you should be doing is meditating, because that's the only thing you can do that animals can't do. So spirituality is that hidden thing, that deep thing inside us that goes beyond the physical world. But because we relate to the physical world through our sensory input, we identify with our body, and saying that the body is not real is also stupid, because all it takes is a good punch in the face, and that'll reawaken your attitude that there's nothing real about the human body. And the question comes up, well, what role does it play in the martial arts? Well, for some, it may play no role at all. If you're I'm not saying that professional fighters aren't spiritual. My gosh, you've only got to see the way that they pray and they do their thing before fights, that they really believe, protecting God. But for some professional fighters, the role that it plays in their training is very minimal. For a lot of people, the role that it plays in their life is very minimal. But there's no denying that the martial arts, through the deep focused concentration and the ki and that chant and that energy, it awakens something inside that everyone experiences every now and then, that makes you go, maybe there is something more to it. Okay. And particularly in a very secular world, when I was a kid, we'd sing God Save the Queen, and we'd say prayers before class and go to chapel every morning and all these sort of things. But we don't do that anymore. Kids don't go to church school as often. They don't go to Sunday school as often. So what's happened is you're not even allowed to talk about God at school. They've got all these rules about keeping everything secular. So there's a void. There's a void where people don't know how to create a value system. They don't have a belief system on which to base their value system, and which means their decision making is often invalid. That events happen, and we have to decide whether we want to do something, and our values and our beliefs drive that decision. And we either get the result we want, in which case we get a fulfillment, and it fulfills our systems, or it doesn't get the outcome we want. And two things happen. We either ignore that and just say it's luck or whatever, and just pretend and life goes on, or we go, okay, well, what have I got to do in my value system, my belief system, to adjust to make sure I get the outcome that I want? And the law of karma is interesting. Newton's second law of motion: every action has an opposite and equal reaction. Even different scripture, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and karma, the concept of what goes around comes around, and it's very mathematically precise. And there is nothing that you can find that, Yogananda said that the reason karma exists is because the modern police just aren't quick enough. But karma catches up with everyone. And the illustration is that one day some guy just cracks a guy smack in the head for no reason, walks away, thinks he's got away with it. But the guy he hit is bent on vengeance. And he looks for him for years and years and years and years. And 15 years later, he sees him walking into a restaurant. So he sneaks over to the restaurant, looks around, and he sees there's loose tiles on the roof. So he climbs up the roof and patiently waits for the guy to come out. And when he comes out, drops a tile on his head, cracks him, knocks him out cold, and the guy's happy, runs away. And the guy wakes up and goes, what bad luck? It was just my bad luck. But he doesn't relate the guy dropping the tile on his head to the event 15 years ago. Well, this is what our life is. If it hurts, it's your karma. And if the experience is painful, it's your karma. It's trying to teach you a lesson. And this is why we don't grow through an easy life. Just like in the dojo, you're not going to get strong without strong kumite. You're not going to get strong without training hard. Okay. And no one necessarily enjoys the hard training. You enjoy the outcome, okay, and you enjoy the benefits that it brings you. But at the end of the day, if you want to be strong, you're gonna have to train hard and fight hard. And so there is no growth. John DeMartini, he was in that famous book. What was that?
Oh, The Secret.
The Secret, yeah. I don't think he was too happy about being in that book. But anyway, he has some wonderful stuff. And if you want to look into John DeMartini, and John DeMartini says a lot of stuff. And he's the one that taught me that, well, I don't remember which words he uses, but I say that optimal growth occurs just outside your comfort zone. If you stay in your comfort zone on a physical and a spiritual and a mental, intellectual level, you're never going to grow. So we have Shin-Gi Toyos, Shin, the mind, the spirit, Gi, technique, Tai, the physical training, the body. We also have the physical, mental, and spiritual. You have all these levels that you need to take yourself outside of your comfort zone to get any growth. So I think that's really, really important. So that's what spirituality is, and the role it plays in the martial arts. Well, maybe it plays none. You can just spend your whole life. It's just like Itosu Anko, the great Itosu Anko, who created the Pinan katas. He, in his 10 points, he says in point number 7, he says you can train for physical health and you can train for real fighting. He says just don't confuse which one you're training for. You don't have to train hard and learn how to kill people. You can just train for health. And a lot of people, that maybe is all, there is no seeking on a spiritual level for them. But then you look at some of the great masters like Yamokeshu and Yagyu Munenori and all these swordsmen, Miyamoto Musashi, there isn't one of them that denies the fact that there's a spiritual level. Even Soulside pointed out that martial arts without a spiritual search is kind of empty. It just makes you into a thug. You need to develop some qualities, and you may not even call them spiritual qualities. You may just call them values. Okay, but all values, even secular values of being nice and all that, actually ultimately have a religious and spiritual foundation. Okay, good morning to you. This Urs Victor, good morning to you too. Urs, Marco, Gaz, Soldado Dios, greetings, young Cameron, Zenbai. Why do you think Australia has not been able to produce a Kyokushin karate world champion as well as the US? Surprisingly, as both are excellent in many sports. Well, good question.
I think that's part of the reason.
Yes.
That, where there's so many other opportunities for young men and women to play sports. Rugby league, rugby union, AFL here in Australia are like nearly a religion here for young kids to play.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of competition in our populations in junior development and so on to go into other sports.
I always
a massive reason.
I think so. And America too. I mean,
yeah.
They're going to make $100 million a year doing, hitting a ball with a stick. Well, why would they go
striking out 7 out of 10 times?
Yeah,
and still make it.
So my theory is, I look at countries like Holland. I think Holland has produced some of the greatest fighters, not just in Kyokushin, but also in kickboxing and that sort of thing. But there's there's a lot of big, strong men in Holland. But there's not necessarily on a large scale, big, strong men sports. Soccer's not necessarily a big man sport, even though big men play it. It's more a middleweight, agile, lightweight, speed,
agility, endurance sport.
That's it. Whereas in Australia, for example, we have rugby league, we have rugby union, we have Aussie rules. The average Aussie rules player is probably 6'4". Even a small guy. I mean, I've watched guys on the field and they're tiny, and you meet them, they're 5'11". Yes. So I think we have sports in Australia and America that ultimately service big, strong men, and especially in a professional world. Plus the amount of money that's thrown to Olympic sports as opposed to non-Olympic sports. Whereas in a lot of Eastern Bloc countries, for example, and in Japan, where the Budo arts are historically well respected, there's a lot of money that goes towards these sports in Eastern Bloc countries.
Yeah.
So I think the main reason is we have a lot of sports that attract the sort of people who would ultimately be very good in fighting arts.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So good question, though. Urs, Paddy, oh, it's good to see you, man. Interesting. As for me, I believe Jesus Christ is our Savior, the way and the truth and the life. Well, good on you. And I have nothing wrong with. And I could sit here and argue for not argue, but discuss that for 10 days, what that even means. And there is absolutely it's impossible for me to find conflict between the same truths that are taught in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Hinduism, in even ultimately Judaism, and ultimately even Islam, things like that. But, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And a lot of these religions these days are blind leading the blind. And so I honestly believe that a lot of the time they don't fully understand the depth and ramification of the teachings, but there is no conflict. So that's very important. Every religion agrees, it's just the organization that's different. Well, that's a good point too. Ultimately, if you were to take, there's an old saying, the East is East and the West is West, and never the twain shall meet. But then the next verse is, but if a wise man of the East and a wise man of the West sat down and talked, they would find that there is no conflict between the two. And it's just like Taekwondo versus boxing versus kickboxing versus karate versus Jiu-Jitsu. When someone's wise enough to experience them all, and I always use the metaphor of climbing up the mountain. You have a mountain. If you go to Mount Fuji and you look around, there's lots and lots of towns around these mountains, and there's lots of different routes up to the mountain. And the town over here will show you a map, and this guy says, well, that map's completely useless to me. That's not even correct. Look, you don't have the correct way up is here. And this guy over here will go, no, that's wrong. That won't work. You've got to come up my way. It's the best way. This guy, no, my way's better. It's much better because the route takes you straight to the top. And then what happens is they all go, well, you go over there. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're lost. And I'm going to, because my way is the right way. And then they get closer and closer to the top, and they start to see the guy over there, and they go, oh, that's interesting. And then when they get towards the top, it means they've had enough experience to realize that the essential nature of the teaching of all religions is one. Truth is one, though the wise know it has many names. God is one, though the wise know it has many names. And so that's why truth with a capital T is one. The experiences of truth of anyone in any religion, and even secular people who are wise, are one. It's the same. We laugh, we are happy, we are sad, all the same things. In essence, religions agree, and well, I think too, Wayne, they have a vested interest. They want you to be part of their religion because they need your money, and it's one thing to have that true dedication to bringing the truth to people, but it's another thing when there's money to be made. It's like the guy that started Church of Scientology. He was a fiction writer who said, well, you want to make a lot of money, just start a religion. And it's true. Some of the most wealthy organizations in the world are religious organizations. But again, that it's not necessarily right. It's not necessarily wrong. It just depends how they use their money. But when money gets involved, all kinds of things happen. Margo, man is not the only man that... Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the strongest instinct in man is self-preservation, and animal as well. And, you can take that quite deeply as well, because, all religions say that there's a very deep connection between man as an evolved animal, all that sort of stuff. Gaz, hence the strength of the spirit is much greater than just purely physical strength. That's true. You look at Solsai, that's a really good point, in that where there's a will, there's a way. And even the great Dan Gable says it's one thing for the body to give up. When the body gives up, that's it. It's all over, Red Rover. But if the mind is strong, the mind can just push through that body. And the body's maybe broken, maybe tired, maybe finished, but with a strong, powerful will, you can keep going. But if the will is broken, if the mind and the will is broken, It doesn't matter how strong the body is. And we see that all the time. You see very, very strong, gifted athletes who just get beaten in competition because they get beaten mentally. And, you know, where there's a will, there's a way.
On that too, Shihan, I remember you telling a story once about Solsai saying he'd grab his spirit in his hand.
That's right. When Solsai was asked, in fact, I think I asked him about the fist. And he used to say, well, you start a little finger, close with the thumb. And he said when he would punch, in his mind, what he was doing was he would grasp his spirit in his hand and he would punch through with the mindset of penetrating and snapping the spine. And, you know, Solsai had very strong will. We've spoken about that many, many times. I think it was almost a superhuman level of will. And in fact, anyone who's any good at anything, what gives them that greatness is the depth of their ability to concentrate, the depth of their ability to remain single-mindedly focused. That's what keeps you above the line, is that focus. Yeah, that's right. Where there's a will, there's a way. Very much so that the strength of spirits is much greater than just purely physical strength. Again, once the physical strength goes, it's one thing. But it's like David Goggins says, you know, just when you think you've had enough, you've actually got about 60% left in the tank. And I remember there's a set of stairs here on the Gold Coast at Currumbin Alley, and there's 144 stairs, but it takes 177 steps to get up because there's lengths in between some of the stairs. And the good fit guys do 10 on a good day. Most guys do about 5 or 6. And just one day I decided I was going to do 100. So I did 100 nonstop. I did 1,000 push-ups, 1,000 sit-ups, 1,000 squats, and 1,000 kettlebell swings. I was 53 at the time. And I remembered what Goggins had said, because at lap 42, I think, at number 42 out of 100, my mind started to say, well, you can stop at 50, you've still done all right. And my body started to cramp up. It felt like my body was breaking down. And I remember thinking, well, 40, Goggins said, when you think you're done at 40, you've still got 60% left in the tank. So I think, yeah, well, I'll just keep going and see how I go. And just took 10 hours nonstop, but my body wanted me to stop, but my ego wouldn't let me stop. I wanted to keep going, make sure I finished it.
For those that don't know, that's bordering on insane.
Yeah, it's a heck of a set of stairs.
Like those stairs, yeah, to do that much.
It's a little bit like the stairs at Kings Park in Western Australia, Mike. Anyway, well, in the dojo, Quinn, it says, depending on the translation, that we follow our God and never get the true verse humility. Well, that's right. And I have to say that's a good question, because the actual Japanese word in the Japanese dojo, Kuni, goes shinbutsu ototobi. Shinbutsu is a purely Japanese word. And what shin, God, or the Shinto gods as we know them. And Shinbutsu, Butsu is Buddha. So in Japan, they're one of these unique places where they accommodate both Buddhism and Shintoism. So when you're born as a Japanese, you're born as a Shinto, because your soul as a Japanese person is born into the Shinto world. Whether you adopt another religion or whether you adopt Buddhism is up to you. But the general Japanese populace is both Buddhist and Shinto. Shinto addresses all the good things, the new things, the good weddings, the births and all this. Shinto, but it has no concept of death. Whereas Buddhism is all about death. It's all about the afterlife. It's all about living a good life, being compassionate and kind to others, because that will give you a better afterlife. So the word Shinbutsu Ototobi, it used to be, we will respect our gods and Buddha. We will, then it became, some say, we will respect our God. I just use the phrase, we will follow our religious principles, because that covers them all. And your religious principle may very well be that you're an atheist or an agnostic. But even as I tend to believe everyone's religious, I just don't realize it. Because if you, even as an agnostic or an atheist, you have values and beliefs of goodness and kindness, well, then essentially you're living a religious life. So the reason Sosai included in the Dojo Kun is because there's absolutely no denying in Japan, you'd be very hard pressed to find a real dojo that doesn't have a Buddhist, a Shinto shrine to pay respects. You know, every space, even now I know with my little son, when we go to the swimming pool, we turn around and do a little bow to the pool to thank that space. And in Japan, the Shinto gods are a kind of an animistic recognition of the energy in a space. Mount Fuji is regarded as it has a god, but what it is, it's like we call them power spots. Oh. And the local indigenous, the Kuris will talk about power sites and the energy at the Ayers Rock and Uluru and things like that.
Mount Warning.
Yes. So he included that line in the Dojo Kun simply because I don't think you can have a Budo martial art training without some respect for the deep spiritual meanings behind it. Well, you mentioned having present classroom at school, so now schools used to have a crucifix hanging in the front of every classroom. Exactly. So, and there are still some very religious schools, like private schools, they can do what they want because they're driven by the values of the organization that they're part of. I recently went to my 50th high school reunion, and that was at a very religious school. And part of the high school reunion was we went back to the chapel. They had a little service. They were singing hymns and all that sort of thing. So there's still those schools there. But in the public sector, I don't think they like it. That people have the right to say, don't bring your religion into my world, even though they'll give their kid a kiss and a hug and give them love. And, you know, love is, you know, the Bible, not just the Bible. When I say Bible, don't think I'm a Christian proselytizer. I have no intent in that way, but there's awful lot of truth and good stuff in it, you know. And when it says God is love and God is truth and God is kindness, so the love we feel is actually that magnetic force within creation that is the presence of a divine creator within our world. The thing that martial arts and religions have in common is that once they become secular, they lose meaning and objectiveness. Well, that's a really good point, Marco. That's a good one. It is true because when you take away any value system from martial arts training, you're just training thugs. Just, you know, it's just a thuggish thing. That's a fact. And religion too. You know, the world's full of religions, you know, organizations that claim to be religious that have turned out to be nothing but dark and thuggish. And, you know, luckily karma comes around. Well, so I remember you talking about how Sosa explained to you how to throw a punch, which is very spiritual explanation.
Maybe that's what you just
That was
explained.
it, yeah. That he said he would take his spirit, he would take his soul in his hand and punch with the intent of penetrating through and snapping a spine. That's his way of, in Japanese, they say, Shinshin Toitsu, the mind and body as one. Shin, the heart and mind. The heart, mind and body as one. And the concept of mushin, you talk about my favorite samurai of all time, Yamokeshu. If you've ever heard of Yamokeshu, he developed what's called Mutoryu, which is a school of sword fighting that no longer used the sword. And he lived in the late 19th century, middle 19th century, and he would get challenged by swordsmen, come and challenge him. And they go, yeah, no worries, okay, let's go. Walk into the dojo. And they go, where's your sword? He goes, I don't need a sword. What would I need a sword for? But he would read their intent. He knew what they were going to do before they did. And so when they go to strike, of course, because he knew he was going to do it, it's like two people doing a kata together. He just knew it was coming. And interestingly, in the Indian spiritual world, in the Indian Hindu world, they say that when someone has risen above dependence on the physical body, he or she has the ability to know when they are going to die, and they can they consciously leave the body. It's called masamadi, where they actually sit down in the lotus posture if they like, or anything, and they say to their friend, "See you later," and they close their eyes and they consciously leave the body. The soul leaves the body. And Yamokeshu was at that level, because when he died, he actually called all his friends. He was a great calligrapher too. That's what I like about him. His calligraphy is stunningly beautiful. And he called all his buddies together and said, "Well, I'm going. Now's the time." And he wrote a final poem, and then closed his eyes and left the body. So there is that very spiritual level. And when you have the great swordsmen of the past, you will not find a single swordsman who separates his sword work from his spiritual work. The sword training was part of their shugyo. Part of their shugyo it actually means spiritual path. It doesn't necessarily just mean a martial art. So yeah, that's a really good point. Martial art religion have in common is that once they become secular, they lose their meaning. Good. I remember you talking about, yes, I mentioned that where Salsa would take his soul. Better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. That's right. Well, even Psalm 144, I believe, you can fact check me if you want. Praise be the Lord my God, who trains my hands for battle and my fingers for war. And even when the Roman soldiers came to arrest Jesus, and his disciple cut the ear off the Roman soldier, and Jesus said, "It's okay, I got this." He said, "Don't you think that if I didn't want to, I could call upon 12 legions of angels?" In other words, don't you think if I wanted to do something about this, I have the depth of experience and power on the spiritual level to just achieve what I want? But I don't want to do that, because I understand that the course of my life is a metaphor, is a parable, and I need to let it run its course. That's one way to look at that.
And on that one too, Shihan, better be a gardener in war. Yeah, I also had that saying too.
Well, I used to have it on the back of our jacket.
Yeah, strength without...
yes. Strength without kindness is violence, and kindness without strength is impotence. That's right. But I used to have that saying on the back of my jacket, which on the back of the T-shirts too lately. Is it on the back of yours? No, it's on the back of that one. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war, which apparently goes right back to the Roman days. So also, I think in the garden, Lolito was Shihan Koye, student and friend of Ben Ajamian from Australia too. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming on. Good. Craig was also religious. If so, which one? Well, look, his teacher, Sone Chu, was very religious. I mean, he was very Buddhist. He was part of the Nichiren Shoshu organization, or the group, which basically centered its religious practice on the chanting. Some religions, there are different ways. Some practice base their teaching on chanting. So you receive liberation through chanting or through prayers, that sort of thing. Others teach it through your service and actions. When you live a good life and serve mankind, you also accumulate the good karma, which allows you to overcome karma. Then you have the repetition, or the japa, or the repetition of incantations and so on, which is a little bit like in the Catholic world when they do the rosary, that sort of thing. And then you have meditation, which is arguably the highest form, where you go inside, you turn off the sense telephones. The energy is always running out the senses, but you learn to reverse that, bring the energy back in the spine. And there's dozens and dozens of references to the spine and the sense. If you want me to go through some of those references in the Bible of bringing the energy to the spine, and a highway shall be there, and shall be called the way of righteousness, and the unclean shall not walk upon it, and there'll be stones of fire on the highway. Well, that's just the spine and the spinal centers. Stones of fire is just concentrations of energy, which is where the spinal centers are. The whole Bible there is no conflict, I think. And so Solsai he was strongly influenced by Sonei Chu, and growing up as someone in Japan, he not only paid great respect to the Shinto traditions, but also essentially, I think his religious practices revolved around Buddhism. And I know that when we would go on camps and so on, generally quite often the camps were held at, if they were held at a religious place, they were held at a Shinto shrine, Mitsumine and so on. And Sosai invariably placed great importance in the morning rituals and the morning prayer time and things like that, the morning chant time and so on. What was Sosai Oyama Mastat's opinion of Bruce Lee as a martial artist, his philosophy and creation of his own combat system of Jeet Kune Do? Well, Sosai he wanted to sell his system, so he really believed in it. So he invited Kung Fu guys more often than not to come and compete in the tournaments. And whenever they did, they got smashed. But that doesn't mean, to me, that all that means is they're not familiar with those rules and they don't train for those rules. Okay, there's within the Kung Fu world, or the Chinese martial arts world, there are dozens and dozens of different fighting arts, and some have proven to be quite good. Some infatuate way beyond what they should. There's some really good systems which, under pressure, fail against a very, very willed, bent on hurting your opponent. Bruce Lee was also a salesman. He was an actor who was just a supremely good martial artist. And if you read his book on Jeet Kune Do and so on, he had a lot of great, fantastic training principles and so on. Keep in mind, he weighed about 50 Ks. So that's going to make a difference when you're fighting someone in a no contact in a no weight division tournament. Jean LaBelle had an interesting experience with Bruce Lee, which is not my place to talk about. So I think they were a different generation, to be quite honest. And Bruce Lee's influence in Japan wasn't as great as in the West, because, I mean, to be quite honest, that when Bruce Lee was around, the early 70s, was at the time that Kyokushin was also really, really big in Japan. So, and Sosai had his own cartoon book and his own comic book series and cartoon on TV and so on. So there was a lot of argument in Japan to say that Sosai was the Japanese version of the Bruce Lee influence. The influence that his movies and training had wasn't as big in Japan. It definitely lit the world on fire.
Yeah, the Western world for sure.
Yeah. The Western world owes its martial arts boom first and foremost to Bruce Lee. There's no doubt about that. That's the one I remember, reaching to the heaven and gathering all the energy in his fists. That's right. Reaching through the target and grabbing it. Yeah, that was the one. That was it. That's true. I train in park every day. I have a spiritual connection with the space. Certain parts, like trees, I align with. And that's very true. And Sosai also highly recommended. I think I mentioned in the book, he talks about the Daishi Zen, or the earth, the earth, wind, fire, earth, the trees, the fire, the wind, and the void. And he talked about the value and importance and energy gained through training in nature, particularly in natural areas where there are some 1,000-year-old trees. He loved training in environments where there were big old trees. You can imagine some of the trees at some of those temples that have been there for 1,000 years, the action that they would have witnessed over the thousands of years when you had swordsmen fighting to the death right there and then in front of them. So there's definitely, and from a scientific viewpoint, you got those negative ions. You go down the beach and you train where there's water and fresh air, and it definitely makes a difference. And even in Musashi, in his 5 rings, he talks about how we love to shout and scream with energy when we're in nature training. I train the park, beautiful. You're referring to St. Peter cutting off, yes, the nephew of the high priest, when they went That's right. That's correct. Saudade de Dios. That's correct. When St. Peter did that, he said, "It's okay. I got this under control. Don't you think that if I wanted to I couldn't call upon 12 legions of angels?" Well, that's his spiritual power that he's referring to. It's a metaphor, of course. Maybe 12 legions of angels would manifest it, but more to the point is, when someone has the power to call upon 12 legions of angels, it's a metaphor for unlimited, unbridled, indefatigable, unbeatable levels of spiritual power. So yeah, that's what it was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Correct. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a touch on that.
That's a great session.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't even get away from that first question where we're talking about the spiritual aspects of man. But it becomes a matter of identification. If you identify as the body, well, then it's very difficult to think beyond the body. When you go into a state of prayer and meditation, then you actually shut the senses out and you go within and you draw the energy back towards the spine, which is where the spiritual soul resides. That's why when you see even pictures of Christian saints and so on, where they have that halo of light, and when their eyes are up, because their energy goes up the spine into what's called the Christ center, or in Indian Kutastha Chaitanya, or they call it the Christ center here, where the energy, the highest level of energy resides in the body. So there is no doubt. Yeah, I think, look, we could have talked more about it, but that's a good little session, and I'm glad we got some good feedback too. And for those people who aren't here for the live question and answer, by all means, leave your comments. If you're an atheist who thinks I'm talking through my butt, well, that's fine too. You want to do better than just whinge, though. You want to give me evidence. There is no proof ever produced that there is no God. The argument that the Christians need to prove their God is not the point. Christians themselves prove it every day in their day-to-day experiences. But if you want to disprove something, if you want to prove that something is false, first of all, you have to be able to prove that it's false. And there is nothing ever shown that disproves the concept of an intelligent creator, an intelligence through creation. And until atheists, or until even agnostics can prove that there is no existence, you've got a long way to go. Okay, because faith is the proof of things unseen, as they say, and the first step to moving towards a spiritual life is a belief. But then you have to go beyond a belief. And when you have multiple experiences that confirm what you believe to be true, then you have faith, and your faith becomes unshakable. And this is why people who have a deep spiritual experience and a deep spiritual life, they cannot move away from it, because the faith of things unseen is too strong. Can they put it in a test tube? Can they write a mathematical formula for it? Well, no. But there are many things to prove that the existence of this is true. And the most scientific, science, the objective of science is to disprove something. And what determines whether an experiment holds validity is the ability for people to reproduce that experiment.
Yeah.
So I say that water boils at 100 degrees at sea level. You go, well, that's rubbish. And he goes, well, hang on a second. I just boiled water, and what do you know? It's 100 degrees. It starts to boil. Someone else says the same thing. So maybe someone somewhere one day will come along and prove that it doesn't boil 100 degrees at sea level, because it boils much lower temperature at higher up. So that's why you can never, much higher temperature, because that's why you can never boil potatoes in Mexico City, because the water can't get hot. Yeah, it boils. It boils at a lower temperature. That's why. But anyway, so the point is, It's a very important topic, and what makes it scientific, see, from my viewpoint, there is no conflict between science and religion. And if you find conflict, it just means, 200 years ago, science wasn't talking about quantum physics and subatomic particles and even the presence of an atom. And you look at the truths of science 200 years ago, and a lot of them have been disproved.
People were drilling holes in heads to get rid of headaches.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there's not washing hands, not changing bed sheets in hospitals with patients. So, yeah, it's been pretty crude.
What was that the washing hands guy's name?
I've forgotten his name, but he was ostracized.
Yeah, I mean, the guy where the concept of washing your hands to remove remove bacteria and so on comes from, his name will come to me in a sec. It was a German name. He was a doctor who couldn't work out why people were dying from the women were dying. Women would just give birth, and then they die from a condition that was solely related to cadavers. It was a bacteria that could only develop in dead bodies. He couldn't work out why. And then he realized what was happening was that the doctors who were doing autopsies on the cadavers were downstairs, and then they get called up to deliver a baby, and their hands weren't washed, and that woman would get the bacteria from the cadavers.
Get exposed, yeah.
And so he said, well, I've got this great idea. Let's wash our hands. And they literally hounded him out of the medical profession, and he pretty well died insane because he just knew he was right. He had the faith of things unseen, and they said he was an idiot. And now, of course, everyone washes their hand. The first thing you teach your kid after they go to the toilet, wash your hands. So that just goes to show. And I would say in 100 years, 200 years, 300, 500 years, the notion that there is no God will be just so alien to people, because people will experience it through their own meditation. And, doesn't matter what religion is or what, all teaching basically comes down to the second verse of the Yoga Sutras, which says Chitta Vritti Nirodha, which means everything that we ever do is all about one thing, and that is calming down, the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind waves. All our problems are related to our inability to calm the mind. And all meditation is your ability to focus your attention on that religious goal. Okay, so anyway. His name was Palm Olive. Good on you for putting a little bit of lightness into his name. I can't believe I used to know there was him and another doctor named Fred Clenner, who I'm a fan of.
Dr. Frederick Clenner.
Who spent 40 years researching vitamin C, and they hounded him out too. He presented his paper proving, you can never prove anything, but he showed 100% success rate treating polio victims with high levels of vitamin C. And of course, when he gave his paper at the polio convention, no one can make money out of vitamin C. So he didn't even get a mention in the journal that covered it. And of course, then they made billions of dollars through the polio vaccine. Yes. His name will come to me. But anyway, guys, good on you. We addressed one tiny little facet of one tiny little area that is the tip of the iceberg. Shin Gi Tai, Shin, the mind, the spirit, the heart. We just looked at one little area of that. Yeah, exactly. I'll look it up. But have you got anything to add, Mitch, whilst I'm looking this up?
No, just the history of what we think of now is the way that things that we do things. If we're speaking about now Christopher Columbus effect as well, there'll be no doubt things that we accept now that in, like you said, 100, 200, 300, 500 years, we'll look back on, I probably won't, and you probably won't, but people will, and say, what were we even thinking back then?
That's true. Semmelweis.
Yes.
The Hungarian,
Mark
yes.
Ford said it.
Yes, that's true. Semmelweis, Mark, correct. He was actually Hungarian. He had that Ignace. It's not, it's Ignace with a Z. That's true. But Semmelweis, one of my great heroes, and proof that science hasn't got all the answers, because science even science says that they probably know 1% of 1% of everything there is to be known.
And from a training point of view as well, Shihan, Charlie Francis said it decades ago that science research was probably 30 years behind actual physical training practices. You know, it's always quantifying things after instead of leading the way.
Yes, exactly. And I think we've talked about another area they talk about muscle memory, and everyone goes, well, actually, it's got nothing. What's the common view on muscle memory?
What do you mean?
Exactly. When you do something, you learn a skill.
Oh, yeah. It has a
neurological.
Yeah. It has a like a memory, a consciousness. They don't say consciousness, but it's ingrained in your system. So when you go back and do it again, there's some capacity to do it better or still maintain that quality.
But generally what they say is it's not in the muscles, it's in the neurological system.
Yeah.
But I have a theory which hasn't been proven, and you can call me crazy, but I think it's also in the muscles. So the notion that it is muscle memory is very true, because every cell of every part of the body has intelligence. And you know that to be so because when the sperm and ovum unite to create a body, a soul, and that body expands and grows from 1 cell to 2 to 4 to 8, and it expands until you have a full human body. The intelligence of the cells is that the cell that is meant to go to the ear goes to the ear. It's not just arbitrary. The cell that, when the initial cell, interestingly, the initial cell that combines when the sperm and ovum combine, that first cell is in the medulla oblongata. And the medulla oblongata is in the root of the brain. And it's the one place that science really doesn't know much about, and they can't operate on it. But in India, in the Bible, it says man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. In India, they say that the mouth of God is the medulla oblongata, because that's where the spiritual entity, that the soul enters and leaves the body through the medulla oblongata. So that is the mouth of God. But it's very true that I think every cell of the body has an innate intelligence. And if it has that intelligence, certain things get into the DNA. Usually they could be things like certain diseases and so on, which never leave the body. They actually go into the DNA as well. So I think the super intelligence of every cell of the body, when we say muscle memory and so on, I think there is a degree which maybe one day they'll prove that I'm an idiot, or maybe one day they'll prove that
it's accurate and it actually is in the muscle.
Yeah, that there is some intelligence of muscle memory in the muscles themselves. Yes, well, that's interesting. Transplant recipients say they get memories of the donor. That's very interesting. Also very interesting, yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Appreciate you. Semmelweis is the man. Look him up. He's the one who came up with the idea we should wash our hands, and they said he's an idiot, and he was right. Okay, so all the best with everyone. Look forward to seeing you next time. If you've got any further questions, leave them in the questions below, and we'll get round to them. And like I said, if you think I'm an idiot, you can say that too. Won't affect me too much. I'll just hunt you down and kill you. And also, if you haven't subscribed, I believe there's 1 or 2 people in the world who haven't.
You're going to hunt them down too?
Yeah, no, just subscribe and save me the energy of going across the globe. Just subscribe, pass the word around, get the word out to everybody. Really appreciate that. And anyway, we hope you got something out of this. Thanks, Mitch.
Thank you, Shihan.
See you next week.